Morning, Julia.
Hey, how's it going?
It's okay. Did you get a haircut?
A while ago,
Oh,
but for the first time in quite some time.
okay. It looks shorter than the last time I saw you on camera, but
Yeah, well, most of the time I keep it pulled back, but I've been getting headaches, so
that's probably, ooh, I'm sorry.
it happens. Spring.
Yeah. Spring, are you kidding me? We have snow outside.
So do we.
What the heck? This is not cool. I mean, it is cool. It's legitimately cold. Yeah, we're going to get up to 6 Celsius today, it looks like. So look at us.
Fun
Making
stuff.
warm. I know.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay. I didn't see a lot of people responding yes to the meeting invite today. So we'll
For
see.
this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it could
I
also
will-
be nobody like responds.
Yeah, I will be multitasking. I apologize in advance, but yeah.
It's a thing.
Yeah, it is.
Let me find the notes.
Which are very helpfully in
Meeting invite.
the invite. I love it when people do that.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, you. Oh my gosh, and we've got a Lammy. We'll just let anyone in.
Actually, while we have a few minutes before everyone else comes in, Julia, did you see Vicky's response to or Vicky's comment on your what was it, your representative project?
I made a comment.
Yeah, sorry, that was very vague. Let me see. So you mentioned, Vicky, about your association with the Floss Foundation's community,
Oh
and
yeah.
how it might be a good way to reach people in open source and maybe hit them from a little bit of a higher level instead of going to them individually.
I don't see a comment from Vicky.
Yeah, this sounds vaguely yes, this sounds like something I would have said. But I don't recall where or when.
Okay.
Yeah, was it maybe in the notes from
In
last
the
week?
notes, yeah, in the
I
notes.
see. No, I didn't.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, that is definitely right in line with sorry, my brain is fried from this week. That's right in line with the channels side of things, the one to many. So I will actually put that specifically on the line for foundation networks.
Excellent.
Thank you, Vicky. And thank you, Amir, for drawing my attention to that.
Yeah, for sure.
I have, well, maybe this is the wrong time for it, but I have fleshed it out a little bit beyond with some staging. So if anyone wants to look back over it, yeah, that would be great.
Cool. And we can go ahead and give another minute or two for other folks to join. Yes, thank you, John.
Comments in shared docs are sometimes so frustrating because only the owner gets notified of the comments. So
Oh, right. Okay. Looks like we're a couple minutes past the hour, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. This is the Securing Critical Projects Working Group meeting. Jeff is out this week, so I'll be doing the best I can to guide the discussion today. I don't have a ton of updates to start us off with, mainly just that we had the OpenSSF Town Hall yesterday, and I made sure to give the work group a shout out for all the great work that we did coming together and getting some of those initial cuts out to the Great MFA project and Project Alpha to help out with that. So really just want to thank you all again for that fantastic work, and I'm looking forward to building that out more and really providing this kind of value to both ourselves as a work group and to different work groups in the OpenSSF and open source as a whole. So with that, I'll quickly mention that our deep dive into Census 2 is going to be postponed for the time being. Hopefully when we get David in the room and we get the results out, we can, I think, all sit down together and really talk that through. I think that'll be a fun exercise. Oh, and looks like Hen joined as well. I just want to also give a shout out to Hen, who's been very active on Slack and helping out a lot as well. So thank you again, and thanks for joining today. So with that, we have on the agenda currently Julia's extended version of the proposal that that was brought up in the last meeting. So I will hand the mic to Julia.
Well, I didn't know this was going to be happening today. It's a nice
All right.
surprise.
Yeah.
Actually, I had that second cup of coffee.
Well, feel free to go into it as much as you want, and anything you want to develop further, we can save for a future meeting as well.
Yeah, so I believe it was Hen that suggested a gradual rollout plan. So if you scroll down or get to the implementation stage, I've kind of outlined some of that. Unfortunately, like, I think there's a bit of a dependency with selecting a voting system, so that, you know, once we're actually reaching out to folks, we have a way of engaging them. So I did put mention of that on here. Jacques, if you want to add your name as the driver, if you're signing up for that. I didn't want to volunteer you.
I already volunteered myself. The mistake is made.
Okay. Well, then you can put your name there, or I will later. But there were a couple of really good questions raised. I actually don't know who talked about analyzing efficacy, because you didn't fess up to who that was. But that's a definite interesting area of research. You know, coming from my ML background, I think of validation algorithms, but this is really subjective data. So the proof is actually going to be whether we find the validation and the resulting, you know, ranked lists useful. So it does need an iterative approach, and we'll just have to keep refining as time goes on. Unfortunately, there's not a way to like give it a this scored 98% in efficacy. So, and of course, you know, we don't hope for this, but the next time that there's a log4j or OpenSSL, if the project was high on the list, then maybe we did a decent job. So any feedback that you'll have would be great. I would love, you know, this is like my third meeting, so I'm not quite sure how y'all like to move forward on these things. So I'd love some direction there.
Generally, I mean, anyone's more than welcome to provide their thoughts as well. Again, I always advocate for, you know, open discussion. Anyone can participate, and generally, I think that's been our approach too. Is, you know, general work group consensus, and just what feels like it makes the most sense for the work group. I've been thinking about this as well, and I think the main pieces of the puzzle are going to be the input engine, so how things are nominated, as you said, the curation and analysis piece of it, which I think we definitely makes sense to work out a process for that, as well as the further analysis and categorization, because I think what could work, would love to hear the work group's thoughts on this, is if we essentially had two outputs. So the one output being that list, right? The list of projects that we say are critical. That alone, I think, would be very useful to a lot of folks, and is something that a lot of folks are looking for. And then the kind of the second list, which is that kind of categorized, where there's a little bit more further analysis done, maybe even as you had mentioned, Julia, a little bit of analysis so far as even maybe interfacing with some of these candidate projects a little bit to dig a little bit deeper and get a little bit more insight on them, to categorize them, because I think that too will be very useful for you know, investment security and what we're looking to do. So I don't know the best way to do that, but you know, we've got a lot of folks in the room, and y'all have a lot of great experience. I'm confident that as a work group we can figure it out and come up with something good. I would also, maybe what we can do as well is to try and focus on, you know, what the end product is going to be, kind of beginning with the end in mind and what we're looking to accomplish, as well as having maybe not deadlines, but just general maybe dates to kind of help us to so that we're not, so we have a good, maybe a stopping point at some point where we feel good about something and can actually move forward with putting it out there. So I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on that.
Actually, before that, can I, I think I might have had a bit of an incorrect assumption at some point that I want to clear up. When I was writing the proposal, were we thinking about validating the kind of primary list of all projects, not separated by categories? Or were we thinking about like having like that primary list divided up and evaluated by each members of the ecosystem and then mixed back together? Because I was operating under the second assumption, and I realized that doesn't sound like it's lining up with what you're saying.
Yeah, there's a thing I didn't talk about in the presentation 2 weeks ago, which was weighting experts.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things, there's a couple of sort of quirks or wrinkles. One is that there have been studies where they looked for signals of expertise to do the weighting on. Those were not very successful. A lot of things that you'd sort of like assume that proved that somebody was an expert didn't track out. So like number of publications, number of grants awarded, peer assessments of expertise, like none of these were actually very predictive, unfortunately. The one thing that turned out to be successful was doing a calibration test beforehand. So the calibration, for those who don't remember, is the idea that you have little tests that ask little sort of questions, and you ask people to give estimates of them. So whether that's like a point estimate or a range estimate, whatever, and you know the answer in advance, like it's for a known outcome, and you use that to basically say how optimistic or pessimistic is this person, and how confident, overconfident, or underconfident are they, which you can derive from their answers to those questions. So if somebody's very overconfident, they'll give very narrow ranges, or they'll give very high percentages of certainty of that something is true, and so on. And when they do the weighting according to that, they have much better performance in terms of what comes out of it. The tricky part there is actually coming up with the calibration questions. They have to be enough in the domain that you're not just asking people general knowledge questions about, you know, when the American Revolution happened, but they also have to be sort of general enough that somebody could plausibly in that domain actually try to answer that question without knowing it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. Going to your question, Julia, I guess I'm not entirely sure. I just think it, you know, if there's, let's say, a curation process and, you know, a project we say, yes, this is critical, let's put it on the list. I think that could in itself be a good stopping point, where some people will just want to see, you know, what is your output of critical projects? And then because I think maybe some further analysis is going to be required to kind of categorize and prioritize that, more work will be necessary. But I don't see why they necessarily have to be different lists, so to speak. If one is kind of a function of the other one, then I mean, I guess it really depends on where they're housed or kind of how that's displayed or communicated, I think. But I'm certainly open to thoughts and opinions.
So I don't want to like talk too much because I tend to do that. But one thing to keep in mind is the currency of time. And I would argue, like, take for example, if we are selecting folks to provide feedback based on language, right? Just programming language. Then having someone provide, having like a JavaScript expert provide feedback on an entire candidate list is especially if we're asking them to vote relatively on some, takes a lot of time. So I would tend towards figuring out how to have folks vote within their subspecialty, and then combine those lists at runtime, so to speak. But that's just because I know that we are asking a lot of the people that we're reaching out to.
I think it's reasonable to tag entries, tag candidates. So say this one is a JavaScript dependency. I expect that experts in each field will gravitate towards their own field where they feel expertise. We should encourage people to estimate outside of their domain, out of their expertise, just to create additional data points. This is partly because expertise also tends to create overconfidence. People tend to give narrower ranges than they strictly ought to based on base rates. So having an additional sort of like check from somebody who's literally not an expert on JavaScript, say, who will give a much wider range, helps to improve the overall accuracy. I see that Dave has his hand up.
Yeah, Dave.
I apologize if I'm, see, now let me lower my hand. Don't keep the hand up. So I apologize for kind of the dumb question on my part, Julia. So we want to do this outreach, which I think is really important within these various. It's not like one ecosystem; it's like so many different ones that are not, necessarily overlapping. And so I appreciate that. I guess one of the questions I have is how is the selection criteria different from, for example, what Alpha Omega are doing? Because I think Alpha Omega are trying to themselves identify the kind of the projects that we need to worry about the most. Is that, maybe this is circular. Maybe we're supplying to them the ones that are,
I can answer that, because I think we expect to spend no effort ourselves in that. We really want to consume that from other places like this working group.
I see. Okay, so as far as that goes, that would be circular to say, Alpha Omega wants to talk to us about what they should focus on, and so we can't ask them. So I get that. All right, so this is really kind of foundational work beyond just outreach. It really does get to it gets to really the identification piece. Okay, I got it. I see others with their hands up, so thanks for answering.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Brian. Ava, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Amir. Just to put a finer point on that question, I see Emily asked a similar one in chat. I had, in a previous call discussing this, I had interpreted this work as an intent to provide some initial framework or scaffolding for Alpha Omega, both how we as volunteers and member of OpenSSF, and how we might do outreach, and how the contractors under the Alpha project might do that outreach. Is that the intent, or did I misunderstand?
That's a good question. I believe the intention was Project Alpha. They want to do some security work on the most critical, important projects, and they asked us to help identify what those projects are. So we had started. We created an initial draft of about 100 projects. Would fit kind of that alpha, that very high criticality, very high, used everywhere, and it would kind of help guide that that decision making. Was my understanding. But I think it might make sense to look back at when Mike Scavetta originally proposed Alpha to the work group. It might make sense to look back at that and get an idea of really exactly what the scope of the ask was. But to my understanding, it was, we need help figuring out, which projects are the most critical. Can you guys help us with that? Or can y'all help us with that? And that's what we're working on. So we did create kind of that first kind of rough draft list, but I think if we're going to do something a little bit more comprehensive and representative and well fleshed out, it will require a little bit more time and curation. But going back to
what I see here is an evolution of how do we decide what products are critical to how do we manage a program of outreach to support those communities. And that appears to be what's in Julia's document, if I'm understanding this and attributing it correctly. That it's more of a how do we support them rather than a which ones are we choosing to support.
So I don't want to jump in front of in front of Emily. I'm just going back to the notes where this document was requested. And I have to admit there wasn't a ton of context. I don't believe there was discussion of alpha at the time, unless I'm misremembering or misinterpreting the notes. It was just about how to get more experts and expertise involved in providing feedback or potentially being an additional input point to criticality score. That was the context under which I drafted the proposal.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarity, Julia. I had misunderstood them.
Okay, I'm happy to evolve it in a different direction, or have somebody else do that. Just wanted to level set that.
Thank you, Julia. Emily, you have your hand up.
So a couple of things. Julia first asked if you could add that clarification point to the document. I think that will help in future readability of it. The other part of it is, while the document is intended to drive more expertise in bringing them into this working group and the corresponding outcomes and deliverables of the group, I can also see this structure being applied to other capabilities within the OpenSSF. And perhaps this is more of a question for Brian then, is could this kind of structure or this framework be leveraged in other OpenSSF work, particularly where in the past we've discussed that there are questions around contracted work. There are things that we're going to have other people do as a paid service. And there's certainly an expectation that if we're curating experts from the community or they're not being nominated by others, we want to ensure that whoever is doing the corresponding work has that input or has a similar level of expertise.
Sure, I'll answer that directly since I was called out. First, I wanted to say, when it comes to Alpha Omega, I kind of feel like I have to represent the Michaels by proxy, since neither of them are here, although I think they are pretty regular attendees of this call. So I'd kind of point to them more as the kind of last word on this. But one thing to perhaps share, which I think is that, with Alpha, because we anticipate the engagements being meaningful, that means we're not going to be able to reach 100 projects in a meaningful way in the first year. With any degree of scalability we anticipate now. So when we get a list of the top 100 or 200 or however many, there likely will still be an internal to Alpha process to whittle that down to who are the ones that actually we should prioritize even more to go out and engage, right? So the lists that this group generates and the scores from this, as well as the best practices badge and there's the scorecard and all these other bits of data will be incorporated into that smaller list. But we know that the list of top 100 was also useful for the Great MFA distribution project, where knowing, okay, here's the 100 top, let's see if we can find 10 people at each to give them codes to get two-factor auth out to, would be useful. I would wager most projects at OpenSSF are going to have a need, or at least some utility, from a list of the top N, and might have their own processes for whittling that down further or taking a slice of that or whatever. So the more that those lists can be not just a single scalar, but a scalar perhaps with some other attributes like sector language obviously is important, that kind of thing. We've had other people ask, well, maybe we should have a top 100 for the financial sector or for healthcare or something like that. All this is to say yes to that main question, which is I expect this list to be useful and actually critical itself to many of the other functions inside OpenSSF and others outside too.
So then my next follow-up is for the expertise curation. In my experience, when you have too many experts in the room, and this was mentioned previously, that you tend to have a one-sided view of the ecosystem. So with a lack of diversity in viewpoints, and some of that comes from junior experience, asking the correct questions from their own background, is there a mechanism, or does anybody have any awareness of something that can be introduced into this framework to ensure that those kinds of things don't happen, that we're receiving the correct amount of diversity and viewpoints and providing feedback, asking the right kinds of questions and doing the analysis? Because quite frankly, especially in the security community, there's a lot of bravado and confidence in your current workspace, and a lot of it needs to be collective learning.
And you also have to think about any structure like this you set up, how can it be gamed? How might somebody, try to corrupt the process for
Exactly.
Because it's tied to rewards in some way. And so, yeah, I don't have an easy answer for that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that that I was struggling with when creating the doc or creating the proposal. I do think if you look at the nomination section, I do think it's critical to provide a way of drawing in experts that aren't connected directly to the members of the working group. And so having that kind of nomination side of things, and also the ability to self-nominate, but that does like validating whether in some ways trying to validate whether someone's an expert introduces its own bias. Actually, it does introduce its own bias. So yeah, I would love any thoughts about ways to mitigate kind of the similarity bias, as well as other types of bias in the process. I do want to clarify that this isn't necessarily to get people to join the working group necessarily, because that's a bigger time commitment, and that was one of the reasons that this proposal was requested. This is to get their feedback on what the working group produces. So I just want to make that point of clarification.
Thank you, Julia. Jacques, you have your hand up? And you're on mute.
Yes, I am. The hold spacebar stops working as soon as you've said anything in chat. It's a fun feature. Yeah, one thing that Emily brought up is the culture of bravado, or if you want it to be nice, overconfidence. I think that's one thing. Let me look on my hand. One thing that using a calibration procedure would probably help a lot with, because it's a relatively objective way of adjusting the scoring or adjusting the weight that you give to different experts based on their performance in an objective test. The trickiest part, as I sort of said earlier, is coming up with good questions, where it's some mix of general knowledge and some mix of domain. Things like how long is the Nile, and giving a range. And I'm also concerned with the diversity as well. I think it's likely we'll have some sort of snowball effect or snowball sampling in terms of how we build the expertise initially. One of the great difficulties is that we need lots of experts, but it's sort of, first of all, hard for the OpenSSF to get its message out, and then we're a smaller part of the OpenSSF trying to get the message out. So I think it's really going to come down to a snowball sample to get started.
VM.
Well, hi team. So this actually reminds me of, it's not directly analogous, but it's similar to what has happened in the SPDX legal team with SPDX, the license list. For years, so how the process works is people send issues and they say, please add us to the SPDX license list. And then there's this great big conversation that happens both on the issues and on the licensing, the legal calls. And that became pretty cumbersome. There weren't really any guardrails. And so things were they would change from week to week, from month to month, from whoever was leading the meeting. And then over time, they developed and publicly documented and used as a checklist something they call the license inclusion principles. Looking at these principles rated by priority, should we include these on the list? And they use that in the issues, and they walk through it and they go, yes, this, no, that. Okay, well, this is pretty far down the list. Does it matter that it's a no? And then they're able to have conversations around openly documented principles. And that sounds like kind of where we're trending here, right? Is to come up with openly documented principles and criteria for inclusion as one of these reviewers, so to speak. And then we're able to have these kind of consistent conversations about it. And I think that's very, very important for us to be able to do. And we can, again, coming up with that list is going to be pretty difficult, but it's going to be incredibly valuable and worthwhile, and something that isn't going to be right the first time, but we can iterate on it. And we do in SPDX as well, in the license, in the legal team, we do iterate on the inclusion principles as necessary. Nothing is carved in stone. Everything is carved in Jello. Everything is open to being edited, right? So I think it's really valuable what we're discussing here and how we're doing it. And I'm really grateful to Julia for starting this document, and it's going to be great going forward. Yay, go team.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vicky. Couldn't agree more. And yes, we kind of discussed that a little bit in our first go of making sure we have, well-defined selection criteria, and, just trying to be factual, as factual and data-driven as we can possibly be. So yeah, very good, good stuff. I wonder if, I think what we should potentially do is maybe have a dedicated session. So I think with the Census 2 results coming out, this is to go back to the 100 most critical projects list, for example, or the critical projects list. Yeah, really have a dedicated working session on that, kind of like a hands-on thing like we did back in mid-late November, just dedicated on that. And then going along with that, the outreach of Julia's program, I think it would make sense to probably have some dedicated time just on kind of working that out and building that out, and coming up with action items, things that we can do to move it forward. Because I absolutely love the discussions that we have, and I think they're extremely useful. And I'd love to incorporate that into some of the things that we're looking to deliver. So I'm going to put on the agenda for our next meeting, which I think will be perfect timing, because that'll be shortly after the Census 2 stuff comes out, and hopefully David will be back as well, and we can deep dive into that output, and then ingesting that into our own method for our output. So and I know that still requires some development as well, but I think that having the dedicated time for that makes sense. Jacques, you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to answer a question that Brian had in the chat about, what are some examples of doing something like this, where you have a collection of experts and you look to aggregate their opinions. The best example I can think of was a competition that was run by IARPA, which is a Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency. Intelligence agencies obviously have the problem that they have a huge amount of data and they have a huge bunch of experts, and they need to come up with actionable insights that are not stupid. Please insert your jokes here. So they ran an open competition back in the sort of the 2010s, I think, or the late 2000s, where they basically invited teams to compete. They would hand out geopolitical questions Is so-and-so likely to be elected? Will this gas pipeline be switched off by this date? And so on and so forth. These sorts of geopolitical questions. They were able to show that some teams perform better than others. They were able to aggregate expertise better than others, and that there were sort of procedural differences between them and how they went about it. Some of which I sort of discussed previously. So that's the closest example I can think of. The other one would be betting markets or futures markets. That's a form of expert aggregation. I'm not in favor of a futures market for what we do. I just don't think there will be enough liquidity to make it effective. It'd be too easy to manipulate. Plus, we'd be arguing that we're giving an incentive. It could be like that whole debacle with the terrorist futures market, where it was like, well, if you're a terrorist and you know you're going to attack, you can make a killing, figuratively and literally, by betting on this future happening and then going out and doing it. So although it would have revealed in the prices that you were planning to do that, it also gave you a direct financial incentive to go and do it. So you can see something similar with vulnerabilities. If somebody has a direct financial incentive to create a vulnerability or to discover vulnerability, but not to share it with the community, that would be a drawback, despite the other advantages of futures markets. I've rambled. Remember, Julia, when you thought you talked too much?
Oh, that was good. That's a really good point. I mean, incentivization is important, very much so. I'd love to open the floor to maybe someone we haven't heard from yet, or someone who has been just aching to say something and hasn't had the chance to yet. Anybody, do we have any thoughts on the discussion so far, or where the discussion is going? Would love to hear from someone who hasn't talked yet.
So, hi there.
Hello.
I bet that has been discussed a couple of times already. I'm wondering, I think Brian mentioned it before. So I'm with Ericsson, so we're a telco company, which means, and that's just an example here. I think Brian mentioned finance, automotive, and there's certainly separate industries. What is your group's perspective currently in terms of industry-specific flavors of said list? Because honestly, of course, I know that that is a challenge to come up with the one list of 100 projects, right? And there are certainly industry-specific projects, more or less critical to one. And it's my belief that if it's industry critical, it's in the responsibility of that industry to also take care of this. But still, it would be nice if there was a way to highlight and flag different flavors of this list. I'm not going to say that we need to have a different lists right away, and I'm totally fine with, let's say, running this as a prototype for a generic list, and then if it works well, we kind of can go into different areas. But at the end of the day, I would like to, well, I think it would be beneficial to have different flavored versions, but I would really like to know what the group thinks about this, because it's like my first time here on the call, and I don't want to make wrong assumptions on where you're going.
Well, first off, thank you so much and welcome. Actually completely forgot. We typically try and give everyone whose first meeting it is a opportunity to introduce themselves, and so my bad on not doing that. Again, thank you for being here, and thank you for the good question. I am of the camp where I think when you really go high up enough in terms of criticality and how critical some of these projects are, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, who you are, really what the extent of or the context is. I think there are some projects that are just so absolutely critical that that they're tied into basically everything. You almost couldn't specify, this is just for industry X or Y. And I personally, I'm of the camp to really try and focus on those projects, the ones that we can say, you know, without a doubt, you know, if this disappeared tomorrow or stopped working, you know, everyone would be affected probably negatively and cause a lot of disruption. So that's just that's my opinion. I'm sure others have different opinions as well. It looks like we have a couple hands up, so let's hear from them. We could do Julia, then Henry.
I agree with both of you. Actually, I think that there is that absolutely. I can't use the word critical in this working group anymore. Utmost critical list of projects that would basically take down everyone. But I also think, you know, once we have that list, segmenting it out by industry isn't out of the question. You know, if for some reason COBOL were to go away, it would take down the government, right? So unfortunately, still very heavily relied on there. But that might not be true for, you know, commerce. I don't know, I'm making this up. So I think segmenting it out once we've got this framework would actually be pretty useful for those industries.
Thank you, Julia. Henri?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is actually a really good example of Ava's point on, oh, sorry, I apologize, maybe it was analyst, I forget. Expertise focus, right? So if we get focused on expertise because we're looking at Java, as always my good easy example, we can easily miss the Java parser that's really important to that hospital focused specification. So we want to, I think, start in Julia's initial direction of categories that are sort of, you know, big and broad and simple. And then that diversity test, one of those diversity testing slices is to be taken out to experts within particular business domains, as an example, of these, you know, perpendicular domains, and flagging what's missing from your perspective. And they're like, well, the big Java parser of an XML format for medical things would be, you know, a glaring thing. It'd be like, okay, great. This needs its own highlight star way of being seen.
Thank you. David, you have your hand up.
Yes, hello. I want to say, introduce myself to everyone. I work from IBM Research, and I'm also one of the founders of the GCC Steering Committee, so representing the GNU toolchain. And related to what you were saying about critical pieces of infrastructure, I think everybody understands that the GNU toolchain, including glibc, binutils, affects a lot of the infrastructure that we have in Linux and the cloud. And so, following on, I haven't been a part of all of these meetings, but just as you're saying, how to carefully understand, to find and recognize those projects, that it's every different industry has its own critical issues, but also as we try to somehow encompass all of this, try to find some automated process, but find a way of doing the sorting too that is just especially with these older projects like GCC, which isn't on GitHub, for example. I mean, if you're looking at stars, if you're looking at things, I mean, that's not going to show up for GCC or binutil. So just to just be carefully to recognize that open source, and especially Linux, has been around 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That needs to be a really big net into how to recognize different projects that were started in different generations, and maybe in different, using different infrastructures, and just to make sure that nothing is missed in terms of how to capture and represent those important projects. And when we're doing these CII or these other census type of things, to how to make sure that everything is recognized.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, David. And that's a great point. And I think it ties into the importance of diversity. Emily brought up the point as well. That's something that we tried incorporating into our first run of developing a list of critical projects. Was I really thought it would make more sense, given how complex of a problem it is, to try and source as many diverse viewpoints as possible, so that we're not just looking at one ecosystem or one tool and what have you. And I think that's going to be a good guiding principle to getting a more comprehensive picture, instead of, what are the most critical projects, in this ecosystem, for example. And I'm happy to say GCC actually did make our rough first draft. I just double checked and it was on there. So and that was through survey response. So it was through actually getting the opinions of the community of OpenSSF. And I think that is one way to kind of foster diversity, is to just get as many viewpoints as you can. Obviously, we want good viewpoints, we want informed viewpoints, but diversity, I think, is very important too. So yeah, so thank you. Very good point. Do we have anyone else that would like to have anything on their mind? Okay.
I want to call out the chat, but I believe David has his hand up.
I think his hand is just still up. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Emily.
So some of the discussion in the chat has been around reporting projects, especially from a Black Hat perspective. So this has been some of the conversations in the SBOM community as well, is if I'm providing a list of projects, can an attacker correlate all of that information and pick one that's a weak point, and they can go and exploit it as a target. And we can come up with the same kind of methodology around critical projects and reporting their security posture. So do you protect the ignorant because they are simply unaware of security practices, or do you publicly proclaim their current security posture? So part of the problem in that space, in my mind, is that at what point do you draw that line? What does that threshold look like? Because when we're doing security scanning on operational systems, the absence of a security finding does not always guarantee that it was tested. So as an attacker, if there is no security information about a project, does that guarantee that they are insecure, or that the OpenSSF does not report on them? And I think this is a problem space that should probably be figured out as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any thoughts on Emily's question?
Just to read out as I was typing a proposal there, someone had mentioned having sort of principles and criteria, and I think this is a good one for generally the list we create will be transparent and public, but we should remain conscious of that. And therefore, when there's a surprise, if everyone in the room is like, I never thought of this, that's the moment to worry about Brian's direction. But until then, the general principle is the list is out there until you discover that thing that you're shocked by.
Yeah, and I don't think in theory we're not going to be showing anything, I would say, proprietary or secret, right? Sure, maybe some of the analysis that we do could theoretically help a bad actor, but I would say, yeah, I guess as long as it's nothing that is, I guess, secret, or because at the end of the day, bad actors are always going to be bad actors, and they're always going to do what they do. But I think mitigating their ability to act badly, so to speak, is obviously important. So yeah, I guess we just got to walk that fine line between transparency and maybe not really giving away anything that is maybe proprietary or secret that could come back to that could be used in a negative way or in a bad way.
I think to Dave's Alpha Omega cyclic questions earlier, I think this is where sort of there will become a feedback loop with Alpha Omega of, at the moment, the most interesting surprise I can imagine is something that Alpha should dive into immediately and try to help that project. And so the group will reach that point of realizing where alpha's applying attention and be able to go, we want to give alpha a nudge on this to go get involved in this project because we've discovered this in a weird corner. And I agree with you. I mean, I think it's the one in 100,000, right? It's the very rare case where something pops up.
Mhm. Lib Nebraska, I like that. VM.
Well, hi, Han, you just reminded me of something else I really did not expect for my SPDX knowledge to come in. So useful here, but another thing they do that I think the critical projects team might want to consider is they have releases. They are not constantly updating the list, the license list. It's every quarter they will have released a new one. And I think that's something that we should look into, right? Not only does it acknowledge that this is a living public document, right? But it also allows us to build in this reconsideration cycle, right? Even if we don't have to update the list every quarter, you know, perhaps we haven't found a new Lib Nebraska. We at least have that process built in, and we can be very public about the fact that we have looked at this and this is where we are for, you know, 2022 Q4 sort of thing, right? I think that would be very good to just from the very start be clear about, you know, we're going to have a process and we're going to have, here's how we're going to do it, and every quarter we'll release something new, and that will also help everyone else who relies on the list. I don't understand. Right? I have a process. They'll, yeah, I know, Siri. Thanks, Siri. He does not understand, so he'll have to come to more meetings. But I think, you know, everyone else will be able to, they won't be aiming at a moving target. They know we'll have a release schedule and they'll be able to plan on that. And that's going to help Alpha Omega a great deal, I think, as well as anyone else who relies upon this.
So would there be a difference then between kind of having one kind of like continually living curated list and having like almost like a time shot or a snapshot at any given point in time?
Maybe, I think, so if you look at the license list for SPDX, it is a single living list. Okay. But at the end of a quarter, they push a new live list to their website. So every quarter, they're adding new licenses, they're making additions to other licenses, you know, if they need to shift something. So there's the public list that's on the website, and then there's the conversations that happen on the issues. And then every quarter, they're like, okay, we're going to package up all these changes and new licenses, and now we're going to push them to the live website. So the issues are public, everyone can see them, everyone can participate. But for the vast majority of people who use it, they just want the published license list, right? And so you have it public in both ways, and you also have this set target that everyone can rely upon. So if there is a Lib Nebraska and you need to jump on it immediately, great, that's awesome, you're tracking that, and Alpha Omega can be working on it. And then when it goes public and is pushed live as a release, then everyone can see, oh yes, now we have a new Nebraska and it's in the top 100, it bumped something else down or whatever, right? However that works. That's going to be a work in progress as we're developing those criteria and the entire process. But I think that could be very helpful for a lot of people.
Wonderful, thank you. Did someone else have their hand up? Oh no, okay. And yeah, Julia, I see your opinion here as well. Yeah, I personally, I'm a huge fan of MVPs, minimal viable product. I'd like to start with, you know, what can we actually achieve and put out there, as opposed to, you know, what is this perfect thing, and, you know, let's not do anything until that's perfect. So yes, I would say, yeah, starting with having kind of like that North Star of what to work towards, and then just kind of having releases right now as the process gets finalized. So wonderful. Okay, great. So we've got a couple minutes left for the hour. I'd love to hear, I try and always have at least a couple minutes at the end for any miscellaneous thoughts or updates, or if someone had something that they wanted to bring up and didn't get a chance to earlier, now is a perfect time for that. So I'll open the floor for a couple minutes before we kind of have some closing comments and conclude for today. So I'd love to hear from you all if there was anything on your mind or something we didn't get to yet. Okay.
Just a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
The agenda, it mentioned meeting. So next meeting, we'll be looking at the census data. So you're still expecting that March 1st-ish?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe they're still set. Brian, do you happen to have any updates on that? Is that still good for March 1st?
The webinar for the release of the Census 2 is on Tuesday, I believe. I believe it's on Tuesday. So I think that's when the report comes out then.
Great. Yeah, so hopefully by our next meeting, that'll be out, and we'll be able to really kind of dive deep on that and analyze that. So yeah, so with that, I just want to thank everybody. Great discussion today. As always, really appreciate people participating. David, welcome, and Georg, welcome. Thank you for joining today and providing your thoughts and opinions and asking good questions. Looking forward to working through this with you all at the next work group meeting. And of course, just to bring up a point that was brought up on Slack earlier, that just to be inclusive for everyone, in case the meeting times don't always work, we can always take things to Slack too if for whatever reason the time zone just doesn't work out for you. So yeah, feel free to continue the discussion. It doesn't just have to be here during our work group meetings. The discussion is always welcome. And with that, yeah, thanks again, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.